Hey everyone, Crow back again, and yeah, it's been a while since I made a video on an Evercade collection. Over 4 months in fact. So maybe it's about time I talk about Sunsoft Collection 2, a cartridge that was released around 10 months ago at this point. Well, so much for trying to catch up. As usual, I'm going to rank these 7 games in this collection and then rank the collection as a whole, all according to my own personal opinion. And that'll be it. So let's jump right in and get started with my least favorite game in the collection and work my way up to the one I like the most. Alright, my least favorite game in this collection is Daze Before Christmas, a Super Nintendo game released in Europe in 1994. This seems to have been considered for a North American release, but it never saw a release here. And I'm pretty much fine with that, as I find this game mediocre at best. Combine that with the fact that you only may want to play this game 1 month out of the year, it has a very, very limited appeal. I'd tell you what the plot of the game is, but it really doesn't matter. Just that somebody named Timekeeper has stolen all of Santa's presents and the elves are all missing, something like that. It's very clear that a Christmas-themed platformer was created first, and then a nonsensical plot was shoehorned in later. It's all just an excuse to run around as Santa Claus, shooting magic to open presents, which might contain an item or some creature that can harm you. Confusingly enough, defeating the game's enemies can lead to them dropping presents, and those are the ones you can collect. So you could run across a present on the ground that you can't collect, but you can open it to reveal an enemy who then drops a present that you can collect after defeating them. Maybe I'm thinking too much into it. The presents you collect are only worth points anyway. There's a couple reasons I really can't get into this game. First is that you don't get much time to react to things that may appear from off-screen, and it just seems like you'll take a bunch of cheap hits unless you know what's coming. Secondly, I found the game really bland. The Christmas theme really did nothing for me. Even the stages where you're flying above the different cities dropping presents really weren't that interesting. The bosses also just feel kinda random. I mean, what do we get here? A hobo snowman? A giant clock called Timekeeper? Oh wait, isn't he the guy that stole all the presents according to the story? Why is he only the second boss in the game? Anyway, there's also a giant mouse with a baguette, and finally Santa's real nemesis, Mr. Weather. The most interesting thing about this game is that when Santa collects tea, he temporarily turns into Anti-Claus. I guess it's like Santa's evil alter ego or something. He's invincible, but he can't pick up presents for some reason. You know, I've never heard of Anti-Claus before, and it sounds to me like he should have been a boss in the game. Is Anti-Claus even a thing, or is it just made up for this game? You know, just in movies I've seen on Mystery Science Theater alone, I've seen Santa square off against evil landlords, Martians, and the devil, and yet not one of these things is in this game. I can't help but feel a little disappointed. Anyway, I can't say it's an outright bad game, but I definitely can say I don't like it. 5 out of 10. Zero the Kamakaze Squirrel, a game featuring a character that was one of the main antagonists in the Aero the Acro-Bat games. This was originally released on the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis/Mega Drive in 1994. The version in this collection is the Super Nintendo version. So, what could cause Zero to stop antagonizing Aero long enough to star in his own game? Well, his home is being deforested and he's gotta put a stop to it. The game actually plays a lot like Aero the Acro-Bat. I mean, Zero doesn't exactly have all the moves Aero does, but it still plays very similarly. Zero's signature move is the Super Dive, where he dives straight down, then turns to fly horizontally for a bit, and then turns again to fly back upwards. The game really wants you to master this maneuver because it's signposted for you to do it at several points throughout the game. And you're not going to get any of these dives right on the first attempt, as you really don't have the time to maneuver properly on reflexes alone. Fortunately, it's not a life or death thing in most cases, but it will cause an awful lot of backtracking on each failed attempt. Well, unless you use save states, but still. Actually, there's quite a number of spots in the game where there's no way you could avoid damage unless you already know it's coming. But still, that's almost nothing compared to the stages where Zero had to ride the jet ski. Or maybe I should call them the stages where I don't know how I passed them because of the worst controls I've ever experienced. I mean, really, that jet ski will just fly all over the place with the slightest press of the D-pad. All this stuff I've been mentioning is the reason I can't say I like this game. I mean, you're just forced to do things in the game you can't reasonably be expected to do without losing a whole bunch of lives first. Even using save states, it can get kind of tedious to just reload the same save state over and over and over again just to get past certain parts in the game. And if you're like me, you'll be using a save state every 5 seconds in those conveyor belt levels, and while the edited footage looks kind of cool, it took a really long time to get past it. So just like Days Before Christmas, I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10, but I'd rather play this one just because it is more engaging to play. Blaster Master Enemy Below is kind of a remake of the NES game we saw in Sunsoft Collection 1. Hell, I don't even think I really need to remind you guys about Blaster Master. It is a pretty popular game and one of the best that was included in that collection. I even gave it a 9 out of 10. So, a remake released in the year 2000 for the Game Boy Color should be pretty good, right? Right? Oh boy, where do I start? Well, let's start off with the basics. The story? Doesn't matter. There's a slideshow showing you a series of events that start off your adventure, but it makes less sense than the original game did, so let's not worry about that. Basically, you're off exploring in a vehicle, and you'll find little doors where you can hop out and enter them, leading to a top-down view where you can explore. You'll eventually find power-ups that allow you access to areas you previously could not, and that's the basic summary of it all. The one improvement this game has over the original is that there's not really any slowdown or flickering sprites that was rampant in the original. But that's probably a result of the reduced resolution you get on the Game Boy screen, which leads me to one of the biggest problems with this game. Because of the reduced resolution, you can see far less of your surroundings than you could in the NES version. And that's a huge problem for a game that relies on you exploring and discovering different areas. Additionally, it gives you less time to react when enemies pop on the screen. Speaking of enemies in the game, if you destroy them, they won't respawn unless you leave the room you're in and come back in. And that's good. The weird thing is that they don't always spawn when they're supposed to. So you may travel down a path, destroying every enemy you see, go to backtrack thinking it's all clear, but then get surprised by some enemies just suddenly appearing because they didn't spawn the first time. Anyway, moving on. In the original game, if you found a door, you could just enter it. But in this one, they thought it would be a great idea to lock some of the doors requiring you to find a key first. So in this game, where you have multiple paths to travel and can't see very much of the screen at any one time, you'll find a door you can't enter because the key is located down one of the paths you didn't take. And you actually have to find 2 keys in each area in order to fight the boss. There'll be a door you'll need to find and explore the area in order to find a key to another door that'll lead you to another area containing another key that'll be your door to be able to find and fight the boss. You know what? This was the game that made me want to take a break for a while. I had stopped playing the game for like a month before I returned to it. And I had been using maps for the game because I found early on that without them, the game was just going to take forever to complete. And oh yeah, this game still does that stupid thing where when you're on foot and you take damage, your gun downgrades in power as well. You know, just to make things a little harder for you. Another thing that was kind of grating on me was the music. It's the same music as the original NES game, but sometimes it sounds off-key or distorted in strange ways. The question is, why would you play this on the Evercade when you could play the original game instead in Sunsoft Collection 1 and have a much better experience? Now, overall, I'm not going to say this is bad, but I certainly don't like this one either. So this is another game that's getting a 5 out of 10. Pri Pri Primitive Princess. No, I didn't stutter, that's the actual name of the next game. This is the earliest released game in the collection, being released in 1990 for the original Game Boy in Japan only. And this is the type of game the original Game Boy usually excelled at, a screen-by-screen puzzle game. The premise is pretty simple. You play as a caveman working his way 50 floors up a tower in order to rescue a princess. On each floor, there's a gem you must collect in order to make the exit visible at the upper right portion of the screen. But it's not as simple as that, as there are monsters wandering around that'll take your life if you come into contact with them. To aid you in navigating each level, you are armed with a hammer. But this hammer can't be used for attacking monsters directly. Instead, the hammer is used to manipulate the maze. Using the hammer on most types of blocks will cause it to drop below. If it happens to land on a monster, well, then it's eliminated from the screen. There are some types of special blocks that will behave differently when you hammer them, but we don't need to go into all that here. You'll occasionally run into one-way blocks that'll let you pass one way but not the other, but most annoyingly, there are fake blocks that are only there to trick you into falling through the floor. On each level, you're given the ability to create a certain number of blocks, which can be done by hammering an empty space. I actually thought this game was pretty good. Some of the levels require a bit of thought to get through, but that's what any good puzzle game would do. And at 50 levels, I don't think the game overstayed its welcome. The game doesn't provide any passwords at any point, so it originally expected you to play straight through with only 3 lives to start, but fortunately with the Evercade save state ability, you get to retry stages you're on until you can pass them indefinitely. There's only 2 things I think really hurt this game. First is the time limit. I really don't think that was necessary, though later levels will allow you to gain more time by smashing certain blocks. Secondly, I think the game would have been much better without the fake blocks. They should have just been left as empty spaces, and the game would have played exactly the same, except without having to trick you and forcing you to remember which blocks are fake. It just feels like the game is employing a dirty tactic to make the game take longer to beat. So those couple things knock it down a bit, but still, this winds up being the first game in the collection I actually liked. 6 out of 10. Alright, next up is Aero the Acro-Bat 2, the sequel to the game we got in the Sunsoft Collection 1. This was originally released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis/Mega Drive, and the version here is the Genesis version. It starts off exactly where the last game ended, with Hector falling to his doom. Fortunately for him, Zero swoops in on a jetpack and saves him, allowing him to enact Plan B, which somehow involves expecting Aero to stupidly wander inside a floating magic curtain. Oh well, I guess it's not that important why the game starts, as long as it begins somehow. You pretty much have all the same abilities and attacks as you did in the first game, and fortunately, the goal of every level is just to make it to the exit. You don't get any of the, oh, you need to collect X number of these objects before you can finish the level type of nonsense that was in several of the levels in the first game. There's not really a whole lot more to talk about here. The game controls good, and there are plenty of hidden areas to find, and the snowboard levels that were included were a good change of pace. Can't really complain about the boss fights either. Now, I gave this a score of 7 out of 10 about 4 months ago when I originally played the game, and I should have wrote notes back then, but I never did. So I'm left here trying to figure out why I gave it a 7, and the only thing I can think of is that even though I thought it was better than the first game, which I also gave a 7, it wasn't so much an improvement to put it on a whole other level. Also, I can't give it an 8 because I like the next game more than this, and I gave that one a 7 as well, and I don't think I could bump that one up to an 8, so I'm just gonna go with a 7 for this one. When Blaze first announced Galaxy Fight for this collection, I kinda got excited because I thought we were gonna be getting the first Neo Geo game on the Evercade. I hadn't realized that the game had been ported to the PlayStation and Saturn, and when I found that out, well, I was a little disappointed because I knew it wasn't gonna be the Neo Geo version of the game. Nope, this is the PlayStation version, and from the little research I've done on this game, it's by far the worst version of the game. The original Neo Geo version was released in 1995, and this PlayStation port came out a little bit over a year after. This is your standard 1v1 fighting game with a futuristic galaxy setting. There are 8 playable characters to choose from and 4 non-playable boss characters, which include a sub-boss, a regular endgame boss, a bonus round boss, and a hidden boss which you can fight if certain criteria is met. The game only uses 3 buttons for attacks, and the 4th button is for taunts, which really does nothing for you. The joystick movements for special moves are very much like Street Fighter 2, so if you're familiar with that, this is kind of a pick-up-and-play game. There are no super meters or super moves or super complicated move inputs in this game. The game does change things up a little bit though by not having any walls the character can get pinned behind. Nope, the screen will just keep scrolling forever as far as I could tell. I like the variety of the 8 characters you can choose from, and what I mean by that is that these characters all seem to play differently. Now I say that not having played with all the characters, but in fighting with a few of them against the entire lineup, you can tell that they're all going to feel different. Now, unfortunately, as I mentioned, we aren't getting anything close to the best version of Galaxy Fight. The PlayStation version here is stuck with loading times which always cause the music to break during character dialogue before each fight, and we get super pixelated graphics compared to all the other versions that even slow down at times. But still, the fighting game selection on cartridge for the Evercade is so bad that this may be the best fighting game on the platform, well, not counting the Street Fighter games that are stuck on certain Evercade devices. The only other fighting game I could think of that comes close is Fighter's History. But as it is, it's still fun to play once you get a handle on a character, so I'll give it a 7 out of 10. However, since this cart's release, Neo Geo games have been announced as coming sometime in 2025, and just about any fighting game for that platform could probably blow this away. And the #1 game in this collection is Ufouria, the Saga, originally released in Japan in 1991 for the Famicom under the name Hibiriki. It was released in Europe and Australia in 1992, and not in North America. Well, not until the Wii Virtual Console in 2010. Seems that the North American version was cancelled when Sunsoft of America didn't approve of the character designs. Well, that's according to Wikipedia at least. And you gotta keep in mind they didn't approve of the character designs in the Japanese version. They were in fact altered when the game came to Europe and Australia, and those are the characters we're seeing here on the Evercade. The story is that there are 4 friends that are out exploring in this land called Ufouria, and they happen upon a giant crater. In the crater, they find an object which appears to be a crystal. 3 of the friends go to grab it, but they wind up falling further into the crater. The one left remaining climbs down further into the crater to find them, and winds up in a whole nother world. And that begins the game. You start out as Bop Louie, who starts out with the abilities of walking and jumping. You know, the platforming basics. But he does gain more abilities over time. As you explore, you'll run into your friends one by one who've forgotten who they were, but after you beat some sense into them, they'll join you on your journey. And this means that you can switch to each character once you've collected them anytime you want. There's Freon Leon, who can swim and walk without falling on ice. Shades, who moves very slow but can jump very high, and Gil, who could walk underwater but can't jump very high. Each one of these characters will also gain a special ability as the game progresses. So yeah, this is kind of like a Metroidvania, where there are certain areas you can't access until you collect a certain character or a certain ability. You could defeat some monsters by jumping on them, but you have to remember to press down when you land on them, otherwise it doesn't work. And I don't understand what the point is of having to hold down in the air in order to stomp. Didn't Mario show how simple stomping an enemy was like 8 years prior to the release of this game? Anyway, you can also pick up balls and throw them as an alternative to stomping on enemies. And while I'm on the topic, another controller quirk I don't like is how ducking works. Sure, you press down to duck, but releasing the joystick doesn't make you stand back up. You have to press up to stand back up. I mean, come on guys, ducking was perfected long before this game was released. Why would you change it? Because now, if I accidentally push down, I've got to remember to push up again before I could get out of any danger I might be in. Another weird thing is that the game is called Ufouria, which references the world your characters are from. However, we never actually see Ufouria. Not even in the game's ending, which I won't spoil, but I think is terrible because it kind of invalidates your entire quest to get back home. I thought I got a bad ending or something, and that the game had better alternate endings I just didn't meet the criteria to get. The second I finished the game, I had to check online and no, it's just that one crappy ending. Well, regardless of those minor issues, this is still a fantastic game on the Evercade, and I can't give it less than 9 out of 10. Well, as we wrap up Sunsoft Collection 2, the last thing we need to do is rank the cart against all the other Evercade carts. And this is certainly not as good as Sunsoft Collection 1 as a whole. I mean, I didn't like 3 out of the 7 games, and Ufouria is basically carrying the whole collection. This is barely getting a C+ rank, putting it just behind the Xeno Crisis and Tanglewood cart. Next time, I'm going to be looking at Pico Collection 4. Let's see if we can't focus in on that a bit. There you go. 10 games on this one. Again, it's Pico. These games are going to be hit or miss. For my money, most of the time it's miss. Pico basically collects the games that nobody really owns anymore. Hopefully it doesn't take me 4 months to get this one out, but who knows? See you next time.